We left off the last section by saying Athanasius returned to his post in Alexandria for the fifth time. Pagan reformer. Alas, not. Constantius was succeeded by his nephew Julian. Despite being family, there had been no love lost between the two, largely because Constantius had previously had most of Julian's family butchered. The good news was that Julian wasn't an Arian. The bad news was that Julian wasn't a Christian. He was a pagan, and an evangelistic pagan at that. Julian was a brilliant, determined individual and a big adherent of Neoplatonism. Before he came to power, he pretended to be interested in Christianity, but once he gained the throne, he set out to return the entire empire to the one true path of paganism. To be fair, he didn't declare war on the Christians, but nor did he do anything to stop pagan mobs from exacting revenge for what they saw as decades of Christian aggression. And he did continue the honourable family tradition of exiling Athanasius, who was kicked out of Alexandria for a fifth time. Julian was the Martin Luther of paganism. He reorganised the religion into a more coherent whole, and in effect tried to set up what was essentially a pagan church. Priests were recruited on the basis of merit, a skill at sacrificing goats, looks good in a laurel wreath, etc., rather than whether they came from good families. He even went on one-man preaching tours proclaiming the virtues of the old gods. You can't help thinking that Julian the Apostate, as he became known, would have made a brilliant Christian emperor. But he was fighting a losing battle. The pagan priests just didn't get it. In a famous letter, Julian complained that his priests didn't help the poor, like the Christians did. The impious Galileans support not only their poor, but ours as well, he complained. Everyone can see that our poor lack aid from us. Julian's career lasted only 3 years. He was struck down by an arrow during a battle against Persian troops on the eastern frontier. Many Christians saw his death as divine punishment. The talk of the town. Julian's successor, a general called Jovian, re-established Christianity as the empire's religion du jour, and then promptly died from fumes given off by the charcoal fire in his tent, making him among the earliest known victims of carbon monoxide poisoning. Before he died, though, he managed to reinstate Athanasius as Bishop of Alexandria, his 6th time in the post. Jovian was succeeded by another general, Valens, and he was, guess what, that's right, an Arian. So he exiled Athanasius again. This time, though, Athanasius had learned from experience and didn't bother moving very far, just to the outskirts of Alexandria. Some reports indicate that he spent his time living in his family tomb. Valens was persuaded fairly swiftly to rescind the order, and Athanasius returned. Fortunately for this 67-year-old, 7 times Bishop of Alexandria, the power and influence of Arianism was waning. In 378, Valens was killed during a battle. At this time, the empire was in 2 bits, the western and the eastern halves. The western emperor, Gratian, sent a retired Spanish general to assume the throne. He became Emperor Theodosius I, and had absolutely no time for the intricacies of Arianism. He reflects the general attitude in the West, which says a lot for this theological argument as just namby-pamby mucking around with words. Sorry, start again. He reflects the general attitude in the West, which saw a lot of this theological argument as just namby-pamby mucking about with words. To Theodosius, maybe another one. Bless you, bless me, whatever. To Theodosius, those who rejected Nicaea were simply demented and insane. Theologically, much work had also been done by the work of 3 clerics known as the Cappadocian Fathers. Basil of Caesarea, circa 329 to 379, aka Basil the Great, his brother Gregory of Nyssa, circa 330 to 395, and their friend Gregory of Nazianzus, 330 to 389. Macrina, circa 327 to 380, Basil and Gregory's sister, was also a renowned leader and founder of a modern and important nunnery. Today she is celebrated in the famous liturgical dance, the Macarena. I don't think so. Basil got his nickname, the Great, from his actions. He used nearly all his family's fortune to create a food bank for the poor during a famine in Cappadocia. He also built one of the first Christian hospitals and a hospice. Okay, so these 3, Basil, Gregory of Nyssa and Gregory of Nazianzus, these three managed to rally most of the churches around a compromise. They accepted the Nicene idea that the Father and Son share one substance, but they also agreed with what Tertullian had proposed 2 centuries earlier, that Jesus and the Father were of one substance, but that they were 3 distinct persons, Father, Son, and Spirit. Now, to modern readers, this might all sound like some kind of esoteric argument between clergy, but actually everyone was talking about it. Gregory of Nyssa complained that Constantinople is full of it. The squares, the marketplaces, the crossroads, the alleyways, old clothes men, money changers, food sellers, they're all busy arguing. If you ask someone to give you change, he philosophizes about the begotten and the unbegotten. If you inquire about the price of a loaf, you are told by way of reply that the Father is greater and the Son is inferior. If you ask, is my bath ready, the attendant answers that the Son was made out of nothing. Constantinople is clearly full of it in a number of ways. The city talked theology like modern cities talk football. And what is interesting, and frankly depressing, about the debate over Arianism is that it is the first major example of theology turning into brain surgery. One tiny slip and you're dead. With Novatian and Donatus, tomato, at least the arguments had been about real things, stuff that you did. It was about whether or not you had made a sacrifice to the emperor. Marcion and Montanus, that was about big stuff as well, huge chunks removed from or added to scripture. But this seems about playing with words. No, less than words, letters. At one stage, the debate becomes between 2 Greek words, homoousios, which means similar essence, and homoousios, which means same essence. The difference between them is the Greek letter I, 1 iota. Talk about jots and tittles. And because Christianity was now part of the imperial structure, it became possible to properly punish those who disagreed with you. Theodosius decided to put a stop to all this nonsense. In 381, he summoned a council, the Second Ecumenical Council at Constantinople. Arianism was once again outlawed, and significantly, Theodosius declared that from that time onwards, heresy would henceforth be a crime against the state. All heretics would be fined the enormous sum of £10 of gold, and any layman who allowed heretical rites to happen on their land could find all their property confiscated. For the first time, heresy was enshrined in criminal law. For the first time in the history of Christianity, there was thought crime. Jesus had argued with people who disagreed with him. He had made fun of them, but he had also shared meat and drink with them, and on the cross forgave them. Now his followers were prosecuting them and locking them up. No wonder so many of his followers ran away into the desert. The Council of Constantinople also declared that since Constantinople was the new Rome, it should have an appropriate status. So it was declared the number 2 bishopric in the empire, second only to Rome. This annoyed the clergy in Rome, who thought of themselves as above such things as needing a number 2. And it really annoyed Alexandria and Antioch, who thought of themselves as much more historic and worthy of such status, not without reason. Basil was dead by the time of the council, which is probably just as well. It would only have upset him. It was riddled with politics. Many people could see the trajectory that Christianity was on, and they didn't like it. Gregory of Nazianzus was so angry he walked out of the council, resigned the bishopric of Constantinople, to which he had only just been appointed, and returned to his monastery. When he was invited to another council at a later date, he utterly refused to attend. "Synods and councils I salute from a distance," he said. "Never again will I sit in those gatherings of cranes and geese." His farewell sermon, delivered at Constantinople, is perhaps the most magnificently sarcastic sermon ever preached. He painted a picture of what the higher echelons of the clergy had become. "I was not aware that we ought to rival the councils, the governors, the most illustrious generals," he said. "I didn't know we were supposed to ride on splendid horses and drive magnificent carriages, and be preceded by a procession and surrounded by applause, and have everyone make way for us." And with that he left. Theodosius had reunited the not-so-mighty Roman Empire, TM, under one ruler, but he was the last emperor to rule over both the eastern and the western halves. On his deathbed, he left the eastern empire to his elder son, Arcadius, and the western to his younger son, Honorius. For the west, it was the beginning of a run of 13 emperors, each more hopeless than the one before, and an 80-year descent into oblivion.